We were talking before about what happens. Can I buy a car before or after bankruptcy? Here's a little twist on that. I have a cosigner and I filed bankruptcy. What happens to my cosigner? Great question. This is from Greg. Greg, great question. This happens all the time. And really, if you want the best deal, like we were just talking about, usually you might, if your credit's a little sketchy or questionable, the bank may ask for a cosigner, and that may help you save thousands of dollars on a car loan. If you get a couple, let's say from a 7% car loan to a 5% car loan, that may turn into some real money over the life of the loan. So you want to get a cosigner. I wrote a great blog on cosigning one time saying, you know what, if you're going to cosign a loan for somebody, make sure as the cosigner that you have the money set aside in a place that you don't need it. In other words, if you're going to loan somebody $15,000 to cosign a loan for $15,000 so they can buy a car, take that $15,000, put it in a separate bank account. I know it sounds crazy, but this is the way you'd want to do it so that you don't have to worry about it for this situation right here. You want to make sure the person you're co-signing for is up to task, up to par, and they have a good job where they can afford to pay for it, because you're really doing them a huge favor by co-signing. It'll be on their credit report as well as yours, and you want to make sure they don't put a ding on your credit report if they have a late payment or miss it. You take the date that the payment is due and go back 2 weeks, and you make them swear that they're going to pay that payment and provide you with some type of notice, so that you know that they've made the payment at least 2 weeks in advance. So this way, if they do run into trouble or if they do get in a car accident, you don't want to run the risk that they're going to miss that payment. And if it ever comes a time where they do miss that payment, that money's been set aside where you can say, hey, I'll just write a check from that checking account, pay that bill, and this way I can protect my credit as well. I know it sounds extreme, but here's the alternative. Let's say, for example, you signed a car for, back in 2007, you signed a car note for somebody. 2008, the market tanks on the real estate. Their house now is upside down, and they lose their job. Ay, ay, ay. Perfect financial storm. They look to file bankruptcy, and they can't afford to keep the car anymore. Now what happens to the cosigner? Well, once that person files bankruptcy, they're no longer legally obligated to pay that debt. But the debt's still due and owing on behalf of the cosigner. In other words, the cosigner's got to step in the shoes of that buyer and say, hey, he's not making the payment anymore. I'm obligated to do so. So the cosigner can step in and start making those payments. That's why I kind of like having that money in a separate bank account. So just in case that happens, the cosigner can come in, stroke a check, and it's paid off, take that car. Now, it may not be worth what's owed on it, but that's something that's one of the dynamics of cosigning. So I'm not a huge fan of cosigning. I don't like it. I don't think it's fair to the cosigner, especially if the other person has a life-changing operation or a life-changing circumstance and they got to move to Seattle, Washington for their job. They take the car with them. Now you've kind of lost control of the whole dynamic, and you're saying to yourself, oh gosh, I hope they make the payment. I hope they make the payment. And it causes stress. Usually it causes stress in a family atmosphere. A mom and dad co-signing for a child, an aunt or uncle, and usually the grandparents now. We see a lot of grandparents co-signing for their grandchildren. And to me, it's kind of concerning. Now, when it works out, great. Everybody's happy and blah, blah, blah. But during that 5 years of repayment on the car loan, it could be a little stressful. It could be a little bit stressful. So from my perspective, when this happens, I understand. I see it all the time. And it's painful. Let's face it. It's going to be painful to one of the parties, because that's not a phone call you want. Hey, I'm filing bankruptcy. Yeah, the car's going back, and I'm sorry, but the bank's probably going to be calling you. Ford Motor Credit can be lethal in those situations, because they're going to start and they're going to harass, and then ultimately they're probably going to wind up suing somebody. Same thing with the other car companies, especially, you look at the banks and the credit unions. They just want to get paid their money. They don't care where the money comes from, but it's going to come from the cosigner or somebody else. So please be careful with that. That's always a tough one.